Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, weightlifting fans and sports fans. Welcome to another edition of No Nonsense, Old School Weightlifting History. You can also find my articles and podcasts on Yesterday Sports on the Sports History Network. I'm joined once again by our weightlifting historian, Dr. Conor Heffernan from Ireland. And today we're going to talk about the 1976 Summer Olympics, which were in Montreal. And the weightlifting started on July 18th and ended on July 27th. The weight classes remain the same as they had at the 1972 Olympics. One big change is the clean and press was eliminated as a competition lift following the 1972 Olympics. I think you might want to talk about that a little, Conor.
Yeah, and there's another seismic event at this Games that we'll talk about as well, which is sort of greater testing for anabolic steroids. But the removal of the military press, it was a long time coming within Olympic weightlifting. And for anyone who's interested, Dr. John Fair wrote an article on the tragic history of the press. But effectively, it became something that was impossible to judge. Now, Mark, old school weightlifting podcast, when I say military press or, the clean and press, you probably have a very strict understanding of what that is. It's cleaning the bar up and then it's pressing it overhead with a straight and rigid back. Now, you can take it to extremes and say heels need to be together, knees need to be together, and there needs to be no leaning whatsoever as you're pressing that bar overhead. What happened, though, and it really became a problem in the late 60s and early 70s, was lifters were using excessive back lean to complete the press. And when I say excessive back lean, I mean, imagine you're holding the bar, across your shoulders, on your clavicles, and leaning back as far as you can to effectively turn that military press overhead into an inclined press overhead. And, it was a testament to the strength of the human spine. If you see old photos of the clean and press during this period, people, are almost sort of horizontal sometimes, nearly with the amount of back lean they have. But it was damaging the nobility of the press. Let's think about in the sport of powerlifting where people get very animated if there's a quarter squat or a squat that doesn't hit depth. It completely, I suppose, damage the legitimacy of the clean and press records because people are saying, well, it's not really testing shoulder strength anymore because you're bringing the chest into it to an untenable degree. So some of the big debates around weightlifting in the early 70s was about the judging of the press, was about, changing the rules of the press, and then effectively just a decision to let's remove the press because it's just we cannot coordinate our judging correctly. Athletes are continuing to push and edge, around the rules. People were just not happy about how the press was being executed by athletes and also being governed. So it was eventually removed. And I actually think, to the detriment of, I would say, iron sports more generally. Like I think the Olympic weightlifting obviously does have an overhead pressing component. But so few people military press now, and this is one of the points of John Fair's article on it. The removal of the press from Olympic weightlifting had ramifications for bodybuilders, for powerlifters, and obviously for Olympic weightlifters, but also for athletes. Like it really did diminish the value of the press more broadly within the world of strength. Now, I still do it and try my best to keep that rigid back in form, etc. So there are some purists who are still there, but like this was the first time since the early 1920s that a lift had been removed from competition. Now, the early years of the Olympics were dreadful in terms of exercise selection. 1986 or 1896 was very different to 1904. 1904 was very different to 1924. There wasn't consistency in what was being judged. So for them to actually remove a lift was huge because it hadn't been done in decades, and they knew that the press and its removal was going to fundamentally change how the sport was judged and how athletes would train for it. So it's a really big moment in weightlifting.
Yes, indeed. You mentioned the excessive lean back. It almost became like a standing bench press or a standing incline bench press. Some of the guys that I spoke to that were around back in those days when there was still a press, like you say, the main reason they eliminated was the judging, but there was also one other thing the lifters were doing was like they became very proficient at doing a leg kick, like bending the knees, but they were doing it so quickly that the judges weren't really picking up on it. And some of the guys I spoke to who lifted back in those days also mentioned that competitions sometimes would, local competitions sometimes would go well past midnight because of the fact that there was 3 lifts, 3 attempts for each lift, 9 attempts. Some of these competitions were going well past midnight. And a lot of guys that weren't really that good at the press were really starting to have back issues because of that excessive lean back. So there was some lifters who were happy to see it go. And of course, the guys that were good at it were not happy to see it go. But nonetheless, that was the end of the press. And so these 1976 Olympics would not include the press, only the snatch and the clean and jerk. And as you said, this was the first Olympics where there was strict testing for anabolic steroids. And I believe there were quite a few lifters who did test positive. We will start.
Yes, and
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, even that is a seismic moment because obviously with 72 Olympics, we've talked about athletes being very open about their drug use and effectively saying like, this is what we need to do. So yes, we'll talk into how that backfires in a lot of the different categories. Yes.
So we'll begin with the 52 kilo weight class. That's roughly 114 and a half pounds. We have the Soviet Alexander Voronin. He was a silver medalist at the 1975 World Championships. He won the gold here at the Olympics with a world record total of 242 and a half kilos. He also took first place at the 1977 and 1979 World Championships. In second place, and I have no idea how to pronounce this name, Georgi Kaseji of Hungary. I'm sure I butchered that name. He placed second at the 1974 World Championships. He equaled his performance, winning the Olympic silver medal. Then he placed second again at the 1977 Worlds. And then we have in third place Iran's Mohammad Nasiri, who we've talked about before. He won the Worlds in 1973 and 1974. 74, he won the bronze. Quite an impressive career for Nasiri, who broke 18 world records, won 3 Olympic medals, and 5 world championships. Okay, Conor, if you care to comment.
Yeah, I think, there are two stories from this division. The first is, you're right, Mohammed Nasiri or Nasiri. This is obviously his curtain call, within the sport. I think he'll compete the following year at the Baghdad, or in Baghdad, pardon me, for the Asian Championships, where he'll win a gold medal. But this is someone, who wins a gold in the 56 kilo category in 68, silvers in 56 and 72, and then bronzes in the 52 category in 76. Like, this is someone who began weightlifting at 13 and had an incredibly successful career. And, I think to finish his career with a bronze medal is an incredible testament to how skilled he was as a weightlifter. And, obviously his power had gone down during this period. He's struggling to snatch 102 kilos in the 76 games, something that he would have done quite easily by 68, so he is beginning to wane, but it's a lovely swan song for him. And it's not something you actually see a lot of times in the lighter categories, where people tend to filter in and filter out. And someone who does filter in and filter out is, the gold medalist, Voronin, who he obviously takes gold. He'll compete in Russia actually all the way up until the 1980s, and he wins the Soviet Cup in 1980, but he's not selected for the 1980 Soviet Olympic team. So again, like, the contrast between Nasiri, who goes to 3 Olympics, versus Voronin, who only goes to 1, even though he wins the Soviet Cup in 1980, they won't select him again. It's fascinating, and just shows how difficult longevity is, I think within the sport more broadly. And, as just a final point, obviously we have a couple of people who don't finish in that category, or pardon me, they don't complete their lifts. One of whom is Zygmunt Samalchers, who we talked about for the 72 Olympic Games, where he wins a gold medal in the 52 kilo category. He fails to complete his lift. So there's even a sort of what if, he had been a bit cannier with his selection, what could have happened.
Right. Well, very physically demanding sport, obviously, and to be able to have that longevity like Nasiri did is pretty incredible. Now we go to the 56 kilo weight class. We have Norekian of Bulgaria, who won a gold at the 72 Olympics in the 60 kilo weight class. He won the gold again with a world record total of 262.5 kilos. He also won a bronze medal at the 1971 and 1974 World Championships. He won a silver at the 1973 Worlds. Then we have Poland's Grzegorz Cezary won the silver medal. He repeated defeat at the 1977 World Championships. In third place, we have Kenchiki Ando of Japan. And I know I'm butchering these names, but they're very hard to pronounce. He won a silver medal at the 1970 and 1971 Worlds. He had to settle for bronze this time. He also won another bronze medal at the 1978 World Championships. Okay, Conor?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I'll begin by talking about someone who maybe didn't set the world alight there, and that's Imre Foldi, who I think we did talk about previously. This is someone who wins the gold medal in 72, and he finishes 5th, the Hungarian weightlifter, in 76. And I think Foldi is just a fascinating figure, because obviously he first competes in 59 in the World Weightlifting Championships. So to even be competing and to score that highly in Olympics, by 76 is incredible. But obviously, he's around the Olympic setup for so many different years. And again, someone who turns pro in 55 and he'll retire in 78. That is just an incredibly long career. And his total is 245 kilos. And, the bronze Ando, who you mentioned, that's 250 kilos. And even Ando is lucky because the man who finishes fourth, Leszek now I'm struggling with the names. Leszek Skorupa, pardon me, the Polish weightlifter, they finished on the same total, and Ando gets in for being at a lighter weight category. So, there is some sort of interesting intrigue going on in this division. The winner, Nura Nurkin, we talked about it a lot in the previous episode. He wins, obviously, a gold medal in the 60 kilo category in Munich. He's now competing in 56 kilo category. He becomes the first Bulgarian ever, I think, to win 2 Olympic medals back to back. He had struggled to compete in the lower weight category, and there's a lot of stuff that we'll find between him and Abajev, the great Bulgarian weightlifting coach, where they were really trying to experiment to see could he compete at a lower weight category, because he'd begun to sort of slip down the rankings in European and World Championships between 72 and 76. So there was a couple of years transition where they were trying to get him to that lower weight category, and it sort of came to a head at one World Championships where he was unable to set a total, and Abajev was sort of hugely criticized at that point. How could you possibly take a gold medalist and now he's failing to get a total at Worlds? Obviously, this does pay off, and it's said that Abajev cried when Yurkin became the first weightlifter to get the double medals from Bulgaria. But it shows, I suppose, the opportunities that these shifts in weight classes brought certain lifters. That you had someone who is arguably, going down the ranks in the 60 kilo category and is now getting a new lease of life at 56.
Right. And as you can see, as we go through this, the Bulgarians are more and more beginning to challenge the Soviets as the best weightlifting country. Now we move on to the 60 kilo weight class. After placing second at the 1974 and 1975 Worlds, Soviet Union's Nikolai Kolesnikov. If you can pronounce these names better than me, just jump right in, Conor.
I don't think I'm going to do much better, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, he won a gold medal in the 60 kilo class with an Olympic record of 285 total. He also broke the world record in the clean and jerk, lifting 161.5 kilos. That's 356 pounds, for those who don't know kilos. Nikolai repeated as world champion in 1977 and 1978. After winning a silver medal at the 1973 Worlds, Bulgaria's Georgy Tadarov won the gold at the 1974 and 1975 Worlds. And he was ready to defend his title, but he had to settle for second place this time. He won the silver again at the 1977 and 1979 World Championships. And taking the bronze medal in this Olympics was Japan's Kazumas Harari. Okay, Conor, you care to comment?
Yeah, so this category has the distinction of a drug disqualification, which is, I think, pretty seismic, because weightlifting just gets decimated, quite frankly, by the strengthening of testing around anabolic steroids. And it's funny, off air, Mark, I mentioned that I'm currently doing research on the growth of women's Olympic lifting, first in the United States and then at the sort of IWF and Olympic level more broadly. And one of the really big concerns for the IOC and the IWF during the 1970s was how dirty weightlifting was as a sport and how it was so clearly involved in doping. And this is one of the issues, was the 76 games. There were so many failed drug tests during this point. So Arne Norbach, the Swedish lifter, is one of several individuals who failed a doping test at the Olympics. Now, there is more to talk about, and I'll talk about it in a second, but his failure to pass a doping test will be repeated by other athletes in some of the divisions that we're going to be talking about. But I think that's, one very interesting, if not unfortunate, consequence of the new standards. Now, the really interesting thing for me in this, in this category, is that battle for gold, between Kolesnikov and Todorov, the Soviet, obviously winning the gold medal, and Todorov from Bulgaria placing second. There being just a 5 kilo difference. 285 gets the gold, 280 gets the silver. And what interests me in this is, Todorov is, on his day, probably one of the most dangerous people within this category. Like, he will win the 75 Europeans, he'll also win the 75 Worlds, with the 285 kilo total, obviously in the featherweight category. He doesn't perform to his best that day. Now, Kolesnikov is himself a very accomplished weightlifter, but it is one of those cases of, being at the Olympics is different to being at a Worlds or being at a Europeans or being at a Soviet Cup. And I think this is, the tragedy of sport, that these margins, you can have a career best at Worlds, but you won't be able to repeat it, when you get to the Olympics, is just so very true. Now, Kolesnikov, who is, a gold medalist, he will not be selected for the 1980 Soviet team either, like our previous friend who we mentioned. The only other last bit of trivia, which I do love about this, and I'd love to know more, is that his daughter got a silver in the 2000 Sydney Games in gymnastics. So I would actually love to know how many, sporting families there are at the Olympics. But I think the big stories from this weight category certainly are failed drug test, and then Todorov, I wouldn't say underperforming, because obviously he gets a gold medal, but not performing to his full extent.
Right. And getting back to the issue of the anabolic steroids, I did want to comment a little bit on that. And I want to make it clear that I am in no way condoning the use of anabolic steroids or any other performance-enhancing drug for that matter. I do believe that weightlifting is often used as a scapegoat. Mm-hmm. And, steroids and PEDs are often overlooked in other sports, especially professional sports that produce massive amounts of revenue. So, in a perfect world, it would be great if all athletes, amateur and professional, would stop using PEDs, but it's unlikely that will ever happen, unfortunately. So,
no, absolutely. And I think, there's one of my other pet loves is professional football, what you would all call soccer. And there's a lot of interesting half-truths around the prevalency of drugs within that sport. But as you say, I think weightlifting suffers from the fact that, much like powerlifting or strong men, strong women, it's oftentimes quite easy to make assumptions based on people's physiques, whereas, in a lot of the other sports that have more slender or, svelte bodies, there's an air of, well, they're not doping because they're not largely muscular. And I think that's an interesting thing in and of itself. Now, unfortunately, you'll go through this division, and unfortunately, anabolic steroids will also play a part in this one, but we'll get into that.
Right. And that's a mistake that people make, because there are so many different kinds of anabolic steroids, and not all of them are designed to make you muscular or even more powerful. A lot of them are just designed to for recovery purposes, so that you can train harder. Okay, so we'll move on to the 67.5 kilo weight class. Petr Koral of the Soviet Union. He won a gold at the 1974 and 75 World Championships, and he defended his title with a total of 305 kilos. Daniel Senet of France won the silver medal. You don't often hear of France winning a medal. Sanet also won bronze at the 1979 and 1981 World Championships. Kazimierz, I cannot pronounce that last name. Kazimierz. You want to take a shot at that, Conor?
Let's go with Sarnecki. Let's go with Sarnecki.
Okay, he's from Poland, and he won a bronze medal, and actually broke a world record in the snatch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, the thing to say is obviously Conor wins with a 305 kilo total, Sanet with 300, and Sarnecki 295. Now, Sarnecki is pushed to the very limit in the context of Gunter Ambrab, the East German weightlifter, total is 295, so body weight does again become important. But even Yatso Shimaya, the Japanese weightlifter, finishes on 292.5, and Tony Yortia, the Cuban weightlifter, finishes on 292.5. Now, the big story, though, from this division, obviously, Arn, who I talked about in the previous category, fails doping test, but he doesn't compete. The initial winner of this category is the Polish weightlifter, Zbigniew Kaczmarek, who actually finished with a bronze medal at the 72 Munich Olympics, but he totaled 307.5 kilos. So he wins the gold medal initially, but then fails the doping test, and the medal is stripped, and he's suspended from further Olympics. And this is actually, it's more damaging from, I suppose, a weightlifting perspective, because he had gotten a gold medal, and the IOC, and you're right, Mark, does make a huge point about, not letting this slide. They're making a huge point about we need to crack down on weightlifting because there is something rotten at play within the sport. Now, there's 39 weightlifters are tested at the Olympics. 7 were found to have taken steroids. That's 18% of all weightlifters failed a drug test during this period. So it's not a great look for the sport itself now, and that is unfortunate because obviously, Conor has a fantastic Olympics, obviously wins a gold medal, does very well. And we see, I suppose, a little bit more lineage. You talked about Daniel Sennett. He'll finish 4th at the 1980 Olympics, so he'll continue on. There's not really a huge amount outside of this division than the Kaczmarek doping scandal, because this really becomes a huge talking point, both at an Olympic level, and I can tell you that from having looked at IOC reports during this period, but also from the global stage, because it's such a high-profile event for a gold medalist to be stripped from winning.
Yes, that is true. Okay, we have Yordan Mitkov of Bulgaria, who placed second at the 1975 Worlds, won the 75 kilo weight class with an Olympic record of 335 total. Vardan Melachyan of the Soviet Union won the silver medal. Vardan won gold at the 1978 Worlds and broke 9 world records. Peter Wenzel of East Germany, who placed second at the 1973 Worlds, third at the 1974 Worlds, and first in 1975. He was unable to defend his title, but won the bronze medal. He won a silver at the 1977 Worlds and bronze at the 1978 and 1979 World Championships. Okay, Connie, your comment there?
Yeah, I think I I am going to be a bit of a broken record, especially by the time this is finished. Dragomir Siroslan, a Romanian weightlifter, he fails the drugs test. Now he totals 320, so he doesn't actually score high enough to actually impact the leaderboard or impact the podium places. Mitkov wins a gold medal with 335 kilos. Milio Tsayan is 330 kilos for silver, and then Peter Wenzel is 327, pardon me, for bronze. So, this failed drug test doesn't have the same impact that it did in the previous category. Of these lifters, I think, when you're talking about Peter Wenzel, like, just to stress that consistency is incredible. From 73 to 79, he consistently medals at a world championship. Like, that is an incredible feat in so many ways. And, I think the thing to really impress is that gold medal in Moscow in 75. His total jumps from, his clean jumps from 180 to 190 kilos. Like, he really improved seismically within a year period. Of the individuals mentioned, I think Milio Tsayan is an interesting example because after his silver medal, he's awarded the Honor Master of Sports of the Soviet Union title, which is an incredibly prestigious title that's often only handed out to coaches or athletes of very real note. It's just funny because, he's part of a broader category of people who medal in 76 who aren't included by the Soviets for 80. And it's funny, I'd need to dig in more to understand why he was awarded that title, because as we've talked about and as becomes very clear, the Soviets are ramping up medals left, right and center in so many ways. But Mitkov, the Bulgarian weightlifter's success, is one of that new horde of individuals that you mentioned, Mark, of the Bulgarians who are now going to become the real powerhouse, within the sport, and they are going to be overtaking the Soviets, as happens in this division.
Yes, it took them a while, but by the time the early 1980s, the Bulgarians actually overtook the Soviet Union as the best weightlifting country. We're moving on to the next weight class. We have 1975 world champion Valery Shary of the Soviet Union. Was expected to win the gold, and he did just that with a 365 Olympic record total. Shary also won a silver medal at the 1979 Worlds and broke 14 world records during his career. Then we have Trendafil Stachev of Bulgaria. Won a gold at the 1974 Worlds and silver at the 1975 Worlds. He won the silver again at these Olympics. Then we have Peter Bakzako of Hungary. Won the bronze medal and went on to win the gold at the 1980 Olympics. Only the second Hungarian lifter to do so. Okay, Conor, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. And again, a failed drugs test that impacts the podium. Blagojev, the Bulgarian weightlifter, he totaled with 362.5 kilos. He will, fail a drugs test. I'm trying to look. He fails, for using anabolic steroids. I was looking at some of them. Aaron Norbach failed for ephedrine, but Blagojev fails for anabolic steroids. Now, he'll come back for the 1980 Olympics. I'm unfamiliar as to how his suspension seems to have been lighter than other individuals, but he'll come back and he'll medal in the 80 Olympics, so maybe it wasn't as bad in the IOC's eyes. Nevertheless, if you look at the totals for that, he would have gotten a silver medal between the jigs and the reels. Of the individuals who do medal, I think, Peter Bakzako is probably the more interesting, because obviously he'll go on to the Moscow Olympics in a higher weight category and win a gold medal. So this is something that, again, we've talked about someone moving down the weight classes to win a gold medal. This is someone who'll move up the weight classes to win a gold medal after the 76 games. So it's a nice contrast, I suppose, to what we've already talked about.
Yes, and you mentioned Blagoyev, who went on to become one of the best pound-for-pound weightlifters in history. He moved up to the 90-kilo weight class, and during the 1980s, he was one of the most dominant weightlifters. And speaking of the 90-kilo weight class, we have David Riegert of the Soviet Union. After failing to post a total at the 1972 Olympics, Riegert won the World Championships in 1973, 1974, and 1975. And this time there would not be a failure, as Riegert won easily with an Olympic record 282.5 kilos total. Riegert would win the Worlds again in 1978, and before his career was over, he had broken an astounding 68 world records. In second place, we have the American Lee James, won the silver medal. He is the last male American weightlifter to win an Olympic medal in a non-boycotted Olympics. While preparing for the 1978 World Championships, Lee had to undergo a second knee operation. It did not go well, and he was forced to retire at only 24 years old. I had the privilege of getting to know Lee a little bit. I met him once at a weightlifting clinic where he was one of the coaches, an extremely humble, nice man, and it's a shame his career had to end that way. What could have been, we'll never know. And I also had the opportunity to interview him over the phone and did an article on him. And unfortunately, about a year and a half ago, Lee died at I think he was only 69 years old. In third place, we have Atanas Shapov of Bulgaria, who won a silver medal at the 1972 Olympics. Okay, Conor, your turn.
Yeah, and I'll talk more in depth about Lee, but I suppose the other thing to mention is still Grapaldi, American weightlifter, who we have talked about previously in some of our earlier episodes. He fails a drugs test. He totals 355 kilos, so not enough to get on the podium, but enough to finish fourth had he passed his drugs test. Of the individuals that you did mention, David Riegert is, one of the, I think, greatest, most dominant weightlifters of all time. 65 world records. I think we have talked about him previously. He wins a gold medal at the World Championships in 71, 73, 4, 5, 6, and 8. He will eventually move up into the 100-kilo category, a little bit later on in his career. He will compete in the 80 Olympics, but we'll talk about that at another day. But, for many in the Soviet Union, the two greatest weightlifters were Vasily Alexiev and then David Riegert. So that's, huge prestige. And I think the fact that Riegert totals and gets the gold with 382.5 kilos and Lee James scores 362.5 kilos shows the disparity between first and second, within this category. To James's credit, there's a really wonderful and touching article by Jim Moser on Starting Strength about James. He was sort of furious that he got second. He thought he had let down his country. He talked to his coach, Dick Smitty Smith. If anyone's familiar with Smitty, he said that he was certain he could beat David Riegert. He was certain that he could, become a powerhouse within world weightlifting. And as you mentioned, Mark, this is someone who struggles due to just injuries and misfortune and, what could have been. And obviously he retires, I think in 78, prior to maybe the 78 Worlds, if I have that right. And I know that Rolf Milser wins the 78 Worlds with 377.5 kilo total, which is 2.5 kilos more than Lee had done at one of his very last meets. So, could Lee have gone on and become an even greater powerhouse within weightlifting? Absolutely. I think, if his knees and body had held up. I also think he probably doesn't get as much credit as he should within US weightlifting because, even though we're no longer in the golden age of US weightlifting, this is someone who did fly the flag for American strength at a time when, it was almost impossible to compete against the Bulgarians and to compete against the Soviets. So he's someone whose legacy, I think, probably should get more credit than it does. Of the final individual, you mentioned Shopov, and we mentioned him, obviously silver medalist at 72 Olympics, bronze medalist at 76. He's beginning his downturn or the downswing. He's not going to have another major tournament or another major title to his name. So there's a lot going on. I think for me, Riegert's victory is a huge point because of the dominance of it. And obviously we talked about, this disappointing games he had in the 72 Olympics where he just clearly didn't live up to either his skill or his reputation. So him coming good, I think, is an interesting thing. Lee James getting the gold. Unfortunately, another failed drug test. That's the way things are going in this games. So there's a lot of different things going on.
Yes, I'm curious to know if there's any information on how many failed drug tests there were in the other sports. I don't know. I know there was quite a few, if I remember correctly, there was quite a few East German women who were failing drug tests. And would be interesting to get the information on that. But once again, we don't want to give the impression that it's only weightlifting that is being plagued by this drug problem. There were other sports, and like I said, oftentimes, if it's a sport that is producing massive amounts of revenue, those failed drug tests tend to get overlooked. Okay, now we're going to move up. One interesting thing to note here is I believe it was not until, if I'm correct, I think it was not until 1978 that they added the 100 kilo weight class. In these Olympics, we went from 90 kilos to 110 kilos. That's a very big jump. That's 20 kilos. That's 44 pounds. That is quite a big jump. So we have the Soviet Yuri Zaitsev, who placed third at the 1974 Worlds. He won the gold medal with a 385 total. That's only a little bit more than what Riegert did. What did we say Riegert did? 383?
Is it 382 and a half or 385?
382 and a half, yeah. So Riegert would have almost won this weight class. Zaitsev won the silver medal at the 1977 Worlds and gold at the 1978 Worlds. Kratyu Simmons, I can't pronounce that. If you want to take a shot at it, Conor. Kratyu Simmers, I'm not even going to try. Bulgaria. He was from.
Yeah, no worries. I think if we say cross to Samarjev.
That sounds good. He was from Bulgaria. He won the silver medal with the exact same total as Zaitsev. At the time, ties were broken by whoever weighed in at a lighter body weight. Third place went to Tadeusz Rutkowski of Poland, who placed third again at the 1980 Olympics and the 1981 Worlds. He lifted in 1980 and 1981 as a super heavyweight. Okay, Conor, you care to comment?
Yeah, and Mark, you're entirely correct. Other sports were struggling with doping and doping failures in this Olympics. Unfortunately, this is also the story of this particular weight class, because Mark Cameron from the United States fails a drug test. He totaled at 375. And then Valentin Hristov, the Bulgarian weightlifter, he fails a drug test and he totals with 400 kilos all in. And he's, unfortunately for him, he's the first weightlifter to be disqualified from the modern Olympics for failing an anabolic steroids test. Now, he will come back to the Olympics in 1980, where he'll eventually got a silver medal. He's competing at the Worlds the following year in Stuttgart, again in the same category. So it doesn't damage his career, but I suppose it does damage his reputation within the sport. Mark Cameron, not someone who, again, gets a huge amount of press, but, he does continue within the sport. He is part of the Olympic team for 1980. He was the lightest and youngest American to ever clean and jerk over 500 pounds. And he was a Pan American Games champion, but unfortunately he failed a drugs test. Now, of those individuals who do make the podium, again, you're having this battle between Soviets and Bulgarians. The bronze medalist, Tadeusz Rutkowski, is fascinating because he, like others, will, bulk up and go into the super heavyweight class in his instance, where he'll compete in the Moscow Olympics in 1980. So that's a really interesting, I suppose, career move or career turn from him. And I think, even from doing this podcast series with you, Mark, on the previous Olympic Games, it is interesting. You see, the more like modern or recent we get, the more weight class jumping I think we see going on, which I suppose speaks to the impact that these things had. The impact that these change in the weight categories had, that they probably added a bit more flexibility for certain lifters. But yeah, the 110 kilo category, and I only have one more failed drugs test to talk about, and then that's me done. Harping on that drum, I think is that interesting story of Soviets and Bulgarians. The tension here being that the Soviets win on body weight. Zaitsev and Samarjev both score 385 kilos. And it's, again, body weight that comes down to these margins. So it's an incredibly tight Olympics, isn't it? When we look at how many times body weight came in to make a mark.
That's correct, yeah. That rule has been changed now, but at the time, whoever weighed in at the lighter body weight, they won the tiebreaker. And you mentioned Mark Cameron from the U.S. I believe he's still the lightest American weightlifter to have clean and jerked 500 pounds. No one has beaten that yet. And that was, I think he did that in 1980. I believe it was 1980. So we're talking 44 years ago. And wow. He's still the lightest American lifter to have done 500 pounds. Okay, we move on to the super heavyweight division. We have Vasily Alexeyev, the Soviet strongman. He was heavily favored to win the super heavyweight class, and he did not disappoint, winning easily with a 440 Olympic record total. Alexeyev was the world champion in his weight class for 8 years in a row, 1970 to 1977. He broke an incredible 80 world records during his career. Second place went to Gerd Bonk of East Germany, who placed third at the 1972 Olympics, second at the 1974 and 1975 Worlds, and third at the 1978 and 1979 Worlds. Bonk's teammate, Helmut Losch, who won silver at the 1973 Worlds, won the bronze medal. He won silver again at the 1977 World Championships. Okay, Conor, you're up.
I've been very clear of my love of Vasily Alexiev, so I'm more than happy to talk about this. Again, failed drug test. Petr Palasek, the Czechoslovakian weightlifter, he fails drug test. He totals 385.5 kilos. Depending on his weight, that may have brought him a bronze medal. The bronze is actually incredibly tight. Helmut Losch, you mentioned, gets the bronze. He's 385.5 kilos. Jan Nagy from Czechoslovakia has the same total. He finishes fourth. And then Bruce Wilhelm, one of my favorite World's Strongest Man competitors, he finishes fifth with the same total, 387.5 kilos. So an incredibly tightly fought bronze medal in that instance. We have two East German weightlifters. We have the great Gerd Bonk, coming in, and we talked about Gerd's, I suppose, ongoing desire to try and overtake Vasily Alexiev, and he could just never truly do it. Vasily was just incredibly dominant, in a weight class not limited by body weight. He scores 35 kilos ahead of Gerd Bonk, and Gerd Bonk himself finishes nearly 20 kilos ahead of Helmut Losch. So you're seeing this incredible jump between third and second, and then again between second and first, like to total 35 kilos, ahead of second place, shows just how dominant Vasily was in competition, and why Vasily is held in such incredibly high regard, by all within the sport. So I think this is the story of Vasily, but for me, it's also a really interesting story of Bruce Wilhelm, who totals enough to get a bronze, but he's let down by his own body weight in that respect. He'll go from the 76 Olympics to competing in the inaugural World's Strongest Man in 77, where he'll win it, and then he'll come back in 78, where he'll win the World's Strongest Man. So, ironically, Bruce Wilhelm doesn't medal in the Olympics in 76, but then will immediately go on to be called the world's strongest man the next year, and he'll hold that for another year. So I think that's probably a good consolation prize for his ego.
Yes, at that point, the world's strongest man competition was in its early stages, and I don't really know how they chose who would compete in those, but there were it was largely probably 85 to 90% Americans that were in that competition, and as it progressed over the years, you started to see more and more strong men from other countries taking part. So if we look at the team title went to the Soviet Union, which won 7 of the 9 weight classes and also had 1 silver medal. Bulgaria placed second with 2 gold medals, 3 silvers, and 1 bronze. East Germany and Poland tied for third, each winning 1 silver and 2 bronze medals. So that wraps it up. If there's anything else you'd like to add, Conor?
I think, the big thing truly about this particular games is just how damaging it was for weightlifting initially. And, Mark, you're absolutely right to really stress the fact that weightlifting was not uniquely dirty compared to other Olympic sports, but certainly 76 made it a scapegoat. And from an IOC level, they really did attempt to make an example of weightlifting. I think that probably was a shame. There were some incredible performances here. David Rigert, Vasily Alexiev, and I think that's probably the thing to focus on when talking about 76 games.
Yes, and I think the International Weightlifting Federation has to take some of the blame for that too, because there were several men in the upper, some of the leaders, president, vice presidents, that tended to look the other way, even though they knew there was a drug problem. And so they have to take some responsibility for that too. For not wanting to clean up their own sport. They just,
no, absolutely.
Yes. I think it has improved somewhat over the year. I think the testing is a lot better, a lot stricter than it used to be. But of course, there will always be people out there that they have. There's a lot of documentaries on it where they have many people, scientists, who know how to beat these tests, and they work day and night, and they are paid well to get these athletes to beat the tests. But as I say, that's not just weightlifting, that's every other sport as well. So I think that about wraps it up, Conor. It was great having you on again. And we'll talk again. Maybe in the future we could do 1980 Olympics. That was the boycotted Olympics.
Absolutely, I'm always game.
Okay, Conor. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon. God bless.
Thanks so much, Mark. Bye. Bye.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.